Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 13th of our monthly talks. It seems only yesterday that we had Chris Steele Perkins talking to us. Tonight, I'm very pleased to welcome Abbie Trayler-Smith to our event. Abbie, could you just let people in if you see them coming up, if you don't mind? Um,
Sure.
and Abbie's going to talk to us about a number of her projects. I'm really excited to see that. Um, if you've got any questions, Abbie's quite happy to have them as the session goes on. So please, if you've got questions, by all means put them into the chat, and I'll see if I can gather them together and ask Abbie the questions as time goes on. Now, there will be about two natural breaks between different sections, but Abbie quite likes questions as we go along. So if you see anything that immediately strikes you as worthy of asking a question, please pop it into chat, and I'll ask Abbie on your behalf. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'll pass this over. So it's over to you, Abbie, and you can share your screen now.
Hello, everyone. I'm hoping you can all hear me.
Yes, I can. That's it.
So, well, it's lovely to be here. And so tonight I'm going to be talking about three of my projects of recent times. The first one I'm going to start with is called The Big O, and this is my kind of most personal work that I've ever done, I think. It spans 10 years. And yeah, I've been doing it for 10 years now. I worked in press for about 10 years, and I sort of found that I was looking to get deeper into my subjects, and I realized that I needed to turn the camera on something that affected me and that meant something to me, and that was being overweight. And 10 years ago, it was a huge issue, and 10 years later, it certainly hasn't got any smaller. So the there are 124 million kids across the world who are classified as obese or overweight. And our teenage years are kind of arguably the most awkward of our lives anyway, regardless of what size you are. For me, I've included images in my work from my old diaries. This one says, "Big fat lady who could be Abbie if she doesn't do something now." This was like a little note my dad wrote to me, because what I wanted to investigate with obesity was not just kind of the obvious health implications like diabetes or heart attacks or whatever, but the kind of how it feels, how and the work was supposed to be an intimate portrait of the kids behind those statistics. You know, who are they? How does it feel to be them? And it's interesting because in the last 10 years, the research into obesity has really grown, and people are starting to recognise that it could be sort of seen as a disease. It's not necessarily something that is because you're lazy and fat and greedy. And that's what I discovered through meeting these kids, really. So I started just meeting up with them, telling them my story, asking them how it felt to be overweight, talk to me. This girl, Kayla, told me a story about when she was on the way home from school one day on the bus, and she fell asleep, and she'd woken up and the kid's written fat on her forehead. And it's that kind of judgment that I really want to question. You know, why do we have these judgments about obesity and fat people, and why has that become a pejorative term? It's sort of, the big O references the big C, because obesity has sort of become the thing to fear, with sort of stigma and discrimination following the overweight from the schoolyard to the office and beyond. I've included some of my sort of diet diaries to show that it's not just about eat less and exercise more, which is what we're told all the time. And these just sort of give an insight into what it's like to to live with it. One minute you're kind of dieting hard, and the next minute you're sort of tempted, and you sort of live in this vicious cycle. Here the diet diary shows where the diet sort of drops off. With the kids, it's been a slow burn because it's a taboo subject still. Nobody wants. How do you approach someone and say, I'd like to photograph your overweight children? So it's taken me time to build up trust with the subject. So Kayla, for example, she's dealing with her anger and her sort of low self-esteem by cage fighting down the local club, and that's how she gets her anger out and fights the bullies. I tend to sort of meet kids through after school clubs or through people who've said, oh, I think you should meet my cousin or my friend's daughter. That's how I've met kids. And it's been a case of getting to know them. And as they open up, hearing more of their stories. And consequently, I've been following them over a number of years now. I love this from Sam. It's that kind of positive notes to yourself. And all that again, that vicious cycle of dieting, exercising, feeling crap about yourself again. So I like to build up the story with kind of observed portraits, and then to find out what the kids like doing. What do they do? Follow them in their lives. And along the way, all of the images are seen by the kids and kind of okayed by them. So that's how a kind of trust and collaboration is built up. So I've said to all of them, if there's any images you don't like or you want to step out of the project at any time, that's okay. Because what I've realized with a subject like this is you really need to sort of be working together. And you're meeting Shannon now, who's emerged as the kind of star of my story. And I'm recently editing together a book called Kiss It. You'll find out why it's called Kiss It later. But this is Shannon shopping for a prom dress when she's 14, 15, I think. So we meet her here when she's 13, going to school, and shopping for prom dresses in like specialist bridal shops because you can't buy your size at the local shop. And also seeing how social media and the digital era affects people now. And I think this affects not just sort of kids with obesity, but it taps into that bullying across the board, whatever it's for. So I think with this work that I'm hoping to tap into a bit of that as well, that kind of general teenage anxiety that we all experience, whether fat or not. This is Shannon going to get a spray tan. So this is her going to the prom, getting dressed up. And I realized that a lot of my images were sort of showing people sad and lonely. Before her prom, she decides to get a tattoo on her bum saying "Kiss It," and this is where the title for the book comes, because this was her message to the bullies, that they could sort of kiss it. And at this age, coming out for prom, and I think I saw a new side of Shannon. Plus, she'd been to the doctor, and they said the only thing they can do to help would be to put her on a medical trial, to get a gastric balloon, especially for kids. So she goes off to her prom. She decides she's going to turn a new leaf. And this was, I made it, I need to make it smaller actually. I'll come back to this one, but was a shot before her operation. So this is her now in hospital with her mum after the operation, where the gastric balloon's fitted. And so I've kind of followed her on this journey. I didn't know when I was following all the kids that Shannon would go through this, but I thought it was a really interesting turn of events, because I purposely didn't pick, I didn't go looking for the fattest kids. I didn't want to go to fat camps and go to the extremes, because it's just an intimate portrait of life, in the hope that you kind of can start to engage. So we see Shannon growing up, and this is kind of post-operation. She lost a bit of weight, as you can see here, but things don't really change, and she continues to grow. And I think that's what the difficult thing is. And what I've learned in my research is that sort of 98% of people who lose a lot of weight end up putting it back on and end up living with it for the rest of their lives. So I think with obesity becoming more and more an issue, it's really important how we address it and how we look at it, because that affects how we sort of change policy. So a couple of years ago, there was a big ad by the NHS saying, you know, obesity causes cancer in the shape of sort of cigarette bottles, you know, packets. And I sort of think that kind of policy and doesn't sort of help so much. So when she first got the Kiss It tattoo for her 19th birthday, she then tops it up with a pair of lips. And now I'm starting to get to know her friends and hanging out with her when it's her birthday. And we really have sort of got close over the years. She's very excited about the book coming out and really hopes everyone can support the project. So look out for the Kickstarter when I launch it next month. I'm kind of fascinated. It's difficult to know when do you pull a project together and put a book out, because with someone like Shannon, I'm just like, what's going to happen? At each stage along the story, there's been a kind of, oh, what will happen now? But it's someone's life and there's never quite an ending. So I think I'm kind of ending on a moment where she sort of emerged as a young woman, and we'll see what happens next on her journey. What I'd really love to do with this project is to sort of go global and see how obesity has affected kids in, you know, different parts of the world. And in the book, I'm going to include, again, with the diary, some very embarrassing lists that I wrote for reasons to lose weight. But all these things kind of inform the work and inform the images. So that's a brief overview of the obesity work. And I just wondered if there are any questions on that, or if anybody wanted to ask anything about that. I'm just going to quickly scroll back through.
Absolute silence so far, I'm afraid. But
no worries. We'll move on.
There was one you wanted to resize, I think. Wasn't
Yeah,
there?
I'll come back to that. That's
Okay.
I'll come back to that. So this piece of work is called After Darkness, and this was an assignment a couple of years ago, and I thought it was really relevant this week with what's going on in Afghanistan with the Taliban taking over, because in 2017 I went to Iraq as ISIS was being pushed out of the country. So in 2014, the Islamic State had basically taken over vast areas of northern Iraq and Syria, and suddenly the whole area was shut down. People didn't know what was going on. And only at that point did countries around the world begin to sort of wake up to the threat and watching, you know, what was going on. So once the coalition got together to then push ISIS back out of the country, I was able to go in with Oxfam, and they commissioned me to interview a series of women to see what life was like after ISIS. And the stories that I was told, I mean, this was a very interesting project to work on. It took time. We had to talk to people. We had to find out their stories and see if they'd agree to be photographed. And what I really love about my work is that coming from, like with the obesity work, coming from as an insider, but then on something like this, you're coming as an outsider. So I think it's a real privilege as a photographer to be able to get to work on both levels. So these women, basically the quotes that things that they said to me are just sort of shocking. This woman said, you know, we came from the dead. As we drove up through the Mosul corridor, basically behind the troops, we sort of saw oil fires burning and people telling us stories like this woman said, you know, I didn't want to send my kids to school because at school they were counting, you know, 2 guns plus 2 guns equals 4 guns, and teaching the kids like that and teaching songs like that. So at this point, the mood in the country was that kind of bit of shock, not quite sure what to expect, but a sort of sense of liberation, but also a sense of how we're going to cope with what we've been through. So I called it After Darkness because the cloak of ISIS felt like darkness to these people, you know, and it's very scary that that's sort of feels like what's coming in at the moment in Afghanistan. This image won a prize in the Taylor Wessing Portrait Prize. It was just one of those incredible moments that we were working at a refugee camp and I was photographing taps being put in for people to be able to access water, and suddenly a huge convoy of buses came along, basically shipping people directly from the battle in Mosul to the refugee camps. And I saw this woman arriving, just staring out at what faced her, and I sort of thought that, to me, summed up a kind of state of the global uncertainty at that time, really. But the longer I'm doing this, the more I realise the global uncertainty comes round and round again and again in circles. It was really fascinating. I tracked her down afterwards, and I'm still in touch with her family. They're all doing okay at the moment, and they survived, and they're back living in Mosul. So it was kind of quite a nice end to that story. I just love this image from a hairdresser's that we visited. So the next piece of work I wanted to talk to you about was sailing the high seas with Greenpeace, which is, I've done 2 trips in the last 2 years. Greenpeace are working on getting a big global oceans treaty. So for the last year or 2, they've been sailing the oceans, doing scientific research, looking at wildlife, looking at the different habitats, doing tests for microfibers and plastics in our oceans, all with a bid to going to the UN to try and bring about some kind of oceans treaty. And it's kind of, I approached all my work in the same way, really. It's like, what's the kind of feel? What's my take on it? What do I want to capture? And I'm always looking to capture mood and feeling, and my assignment with this first part of the job in Antarctica was to photograph the crew and the work that was doing, and also the wonderful surroundings. You know, what are we here to try and save? So Antarctica is a big feeding ground, basically, for whales and sharks and all sorts of creatures, penguins. So on arriving, the first morning we kind of moored up. This was my view out of the porthole, which was rather wonderful. I mean, this was a really beautiful commission because it was kind of hang out on a ship for 4 weeks and capture what's around you. And what was around us was just incredible. And it's strange because I'm a real people person. I always look for people in my stories, and that's normally my first port of call. So, but to be in an ocean and to be immersed in it makes you realize it's kind of completely changed my idea around the environment and what's important, and just getting lost in that vast landscape and realizing how much is at stake. So these pictures all look lovely. What you don't realize, of course, is that we're wearing about 8 layers of thermals and a boat suit and a life jacket, and the boat's jigging up and down like this, and You're trying to get a bit close to the iceberg because your lens doesn't quite cut it, and you're jostling with the videographer, and also the scientists are telling you off because you're getting in the way of what they're doing. So it's all, I always love looking back over jobs like this because in the moment they're kind of completely crazy. This job on the ship for this trip, we were on board for something like 43 days. And I don't think I've ever been so tired as when I've got off a job as of this job, because we were literally working, 18-hour days for 43 days straight. So it's an incredible environment to be thrown into because there was a crew of 35 of us all together, including the scientists and researchers and ship's crew. So it becomes very intimate, as well as looking at this kind of incredible vast landscape. So even with wildlife pictures, I'm always looking for the humanity in them. And this guy really took me. It's like a teenage elephant seal. It's sort of, each day we would go out on these little ribs and sample water, look for whales, look for penguins. Here, this is my colleague, Nuge, who is the videographer. Tim on the left here is the acoustician who's listening out for the recording the whales talking to each other, and Nuge is just taking a moment to sort of grab the headphones, stop filming, and just have a listen to the sounds of the ocean and the creatures within it. And then this happened. We were sort of minding our own business, and suddenly 2 humpbacks came up to say hello and literally swam from one side and up to say hello, and then underneath the boat and back on the other side. And you could literally reach out and touch them. Obviously, you weren't allowed to do that, but they were so curious. They were such curious creatures and so incredibly powerful. I think we were very lucky to have this moment with them. And here, Kirsten, our head scientist, is just again enjoying the sounds of the ocean. But there's lots to think about in this environment. You've got cameras hanging off you, and got to be careful you don't get too close to the iceberg. As the photographer and the videographer, we're like, can we get a bit close to the iceberg? And the boat crew are like, it's dangerous. So there's a lot of, you're kind of stuck in one position. It's interesting because the photographer, I like to use my feet, I like to move around, but on this shoot, you have to do what you can from that spot. So I love assignment work because there's so many limitations and stresses, and yet you can still produce something beautiful. And I love the time and the flow that doing personal work gives you, and taking time to do something. So this was the end of the Antarctica leg, and then from the second leg I did was in the Indian Ocean, and we sailed from the Med out through the Suez and into the Indian Ocean. Hadn't seen sight or soul of another ship for about 2 weeks at this point. We were basically chasing and looking for illegal fishing. So we would spot someone on the satellite and basically sail towards them and hope that we would bump into them, because they would turn their satellites on for a short time and then turn them off again. So for about a week, we were kind of chasing around the ocean looking for these Chinese squid jiggers, they were called, who are apparently kind of pillaging the ocean in like dark spots that aren't seen. So this is where we've basically come across them finally. And this is like at 1 a.m, and the whole night sky is lit up by a whole string of bright lights. So the ships get into position. They have these huge, great lights that bring the squid up to the surface, and then they just kind of shovel the lot in. So this work in the Indian Ocean is about a fishing investigation. And I'm sure a lot of you have either seen Seaspiracy or heard about it. It's sort of very similar kind of thing. So this felt like a kind of chase across the across a vast night ocean to sort of find these boats and find what they were up to. So for 3 nights we sort of hunted them down, but we didn't get very close, because as soon as we got close, they would honk their horns really loudly and basically start pulling up their nets and shooting away as soon as we got within a mile. So we launched ribs, we launched drones to try and capture what was going on, but we kind of failed in the end. This is as close as we got before they shot off. So that was an interesting, because the squid fishing is not something that's really been documented, and it's certainly not regulated. So once you start thinking, well, you know, in the middle of the Indian Ocean, there's like a city of lights basically created by these fishing vessels, and nobody knows what they're doing. So you think, how much of this is unregulated? What's really going on? And this is us sort of not being able to catch up with them as they chase off in the dawn. And then the other thing we were looking at is tuna fishing. So after a kind of few days of chasing around the ocean looking for the Chinese boats, we started looking for the Iranians, who are again tuna fishing. Now they do something that's called gill netting, which is they're only allowed to lay out 3 miles of net, but all the nets we found were about 10 miles long. And we would spot where they were. They lay their nets out at night, and then in the morning they bring them in. So once they laid their nets out, we would then come out on the ribs and see what was coming in as bycatch. And it was quite shocking. So in watching a haul in for like 2 hours of tuna, there was loads of tuna, but along with that would be manta rays, sharks, dolphins. And after a week of filming this, I haven't been able to eat fish since. So there we go. Not that I'm asking you all to not eat fish, but it was just quite a sort of a shocking sight. And I suppose with my work, I'm all my work's about issues and things that affect us as humans. And I think it's kind of interesting that the big things impact on us just as acutely as the kind of up close and personal things. This is Ale, one of our crew members, who's a super diver. So by the end of the week of rushing around looking for the fishing vessels, we were desperate to try and cover it from every angle. So Ale was going in to see if there was anything caught in the net, so we could try and get some underwater stuff. And yeah, it's very it was quite humbling, I suppose. And all of that bycatch, the sharks, the dolphins, it all gets chucked back in. So hopefully Greenpeace can take a load of this information to the UN and bring about some kind of treaty. I think it's pretty key that I've just added this picture on the end. These are my besties on the boat, Nuge and John, who we're all working together to get the imagery. And then just to end on something rather beautiful, once we'd done our fishing investigation, we then sailed on to the Seychelles, where I was exiting the boat. And for about 3 nights, we sailed through this incredible bioluminescent phosphorescence, which was just magical. So I thought I'd end on that. So that I've realised I've kind of raced through everything. And I wonder if people would like to hear more about certain aspects, or
well, I've got a few. I have had a few questions. One from Andre Bergmans is, how much theoretical research did you do before and during the project on obesity, and how did this guide the project?
Do you mean sort of academic research?
Yes,
Because
I guess so.
that, not so much. I went in much more from the humanitarian aspect of kind of looking at the psychological impacts of being overweight and what it means to be living as a kid overweight in today's society. And then it was only as I've become more interested that my kind of research has grown, and you know, I've wanted to know more and more. But I suppose to start with, I never like to, this sounds really bad, but I don't like to do too much research because I like to feel my way into something. And then once I've got a feel, that's when I dive into the research. Once I'm kind of like hooked and I'm like, wow, why is that happening? Or why is this happening? Or where does that come from? And so I think for me, it always starts off with an emotional response to the subject, to the assignment, to the whatever. And then the research comes in once that's started. But I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do it, you know. I think it's for each of us to kind of find our way into a subject. But yeah, and then research can take the route of all different manner of things, not just academic, but you end up sort of going down all sorts of tangents that bring you back to your work.
Fascinating, thank you. I mean, one thing that struck me when we talked earlier about you've got sort of, if you like, three problems that you've covered in these three issues, or four, I suppose. Uh, One is a first world problem, I think. Um, and that is, obesity seems to be much more of a problem in the first world than in the likes of Iraq, where you're covering the women who are escaping from having escaped from ISIS. And then the other two, the oceans problems, are global, aren't they? Really, do you think there's a different approach to each one of those, or are those contrasts you're wanting to bring into public knowledge?
For me, I don't think there's a difference because it's for me it's always about the emotional response to whatever's going on, and that is as powerful if it's something global as if it's something personal.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I suppose all my work is about issues because for me that's what being a human's about. It's kind of like, where are we going wrong? Where can we go right? How can we make things better? That's kind of how I think about the world. And I guess that's how I approach my work. So for me, it's irrelevant whether it's, I mean, it's not irrelevant whether it's a sort of a massive scale or on a tiny scale, but it's just as poignant because
Mm-hmm.
it can have just the same impact on each of us,
Yes.
if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It makes a lot of sense. A couple of things that we had Giles Dewley on our December talk, and he talked about. Well, first of all, I admire the risks that you take when you're taking not so much the pictures in this country, but the pictures in Iraq, and when you're in out with Greenpeace. I mean, for Giles, that risk that he took was catastrophic, and the loss of several limbs. But um, he also then talked about taking a slightly different view of conflict when he turns his back on the people creating the suffering and concentrates on the people having to survive it. And he keeps in touch with many of his subjects for years. Do you feel you're going to do that with all of your subjects? In fact.
I think with something like, for me, the Iraq piece was an assignment. You know, I was asked to kind of um, make a piece of work about women post-conflict in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
So I, and because with Giles, he does that, you know, that's his kind of life work. It's everything he does. Whereas I work on a sort of wider range of subjects. So I don't feel, for a start, I don't feel like I've taken the risks that someone like Giles has taken. Often I'm working in kind of post-conflict zones and sorry, Alan, just remind me I've gone off on a tangent there.
No, it's all right. You're talking about keeping in contact with subjects in the likes of that project, are you?
Yeah, so with something like that project, it's quite difficult, but and maybe unrealistic. So, for example, I've kept in touch with the family and the Sarah in that in this image you see. Where are we? But I think it's unrealistic to keep in touch with everybody. So there's always someone in a project that you sort of make a connection with.
Mm.
And the great thing about social media means you can stay in touch with people. So, or on the Greenpeace job, there's crew members that I will know now for the rest of my life, because you don't, you spend 2 months on a ship with someone and you get to know them very well. Or in my obesity work, like I just don't think I'll ever not be able to photograph Shannon unless she's like, Abbie, will you please give me a break, So I think it's a bit like life, isn't it? When we meet friends in life, we don't know if they're still going to be our friends in 30 years time, but when there's a connection, there's always something to maintain. And I think as I grow older as a photographer, it's become more important to me to have a relationship.
Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily have to be in depth.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a question here. Can you tell us a bit more about your book? I'm interested as well.
Yes. So the book the book is just going to be about Shannon, because I think her story is kind of, for a start, she's the subject I know the best, and yeah, let's tell you more about it. I mean, I suppose her story has just resonated, and I suppose because she's very open. So the book, I want it to be a kind of a story of her, a story of a girl. It could be a story of any of us. Um, I think that what I'm trying to do through her is challenge preconceptions around what it means to be fat, while also sort of honestly examining the impact that obesity is having on society. And for me, when you really hone in on one character, one person, and you get to know them and you sort of see them grow up, it makes you connect. Hopefully, that's my vision, that you connect with her. And the fact that she is so, I mean, what's amazing as a photographer is when you come across someone who is just exactly themselves in front of the camera as they are when the camera's not up, to capture that kind of rawness and that openness. So you can just, each time she looks into the camera, it's quite piercing. You see a lot. It's like she bears her soul. So, and then weaved in through the story of Shannon will be sort of pieces from my diaries, which then helps to get at the sort of where the psychology comes from and what people might be thinking. And I guess it's just because for me, her life is like an extraordinary, ordinary life. Like it's an ordinary life, but it's kind of extraordinary because of the way she is and the way she connects with me and the camera. So Stuart at Goss Books is going to publish it, so we're just in the process of doing the design. I've just finished recording the Kickstarter video, which has taken me about 6 months to get around to doing because it's scary. And I don't know what else to tell you about it. It's in production.
So we need to keep an eye out on Kickstarter, I guess.
Yes, please. Yeah, that would be great. I definitely need all the help I can get.
Yeah,
And I'm looking forward to it'd be nice through the Kickstarter to sort of tell the story on social media as well, because I started this work, like I said, 10 years ago, and then quite a few images won prizes in the World Press Photo and the Taylor Wessing, and then I've kind of kept it under wraps. So it'd be nice to sort of share like all this sort of stuff, this later stuff has not been seen, and So yeah, it'd be nice to sort of reveal that on through the social media. So any help? I mean, I don't know if any of you guys have done Kickstarters, but any help with just RTing and putting the message out there, gratefully received.
Well, first of all, you can send whenever you've got it kicked off. Send me the details, Abbie, and I'll make sure it goes on certainly on our social media. Get it out there for you. Where was the After Darkness stuff published, or was it published?
Yeah, it was published in on the BBC and on the Guardian and
Okay.
yeah, quite a few magazine articles. So that was yeah, and then it was exhibited down in Cornwall, strangely enough.
Okay.
But no,
That's
it
it.
had quite a bit of press. It was also on It's Nice That and Refinery 29. So it got quite good coverage, which is always very heartening when you've shot something like that and you've I mean I did this over 2 trips. Um, so it's always nice to see it in print,
Mm.
as it were, or online these days, which is where most you see a lot of things.
Yeah.
Are there any
Well,
other questions, Alan?
none that I've. Anybody else got anything more they'd like to ask? No, I think that's about it. I think I've covered the safety aspects, and you were you know, a bit more relaxed than I would be, I think.
Well, I suppose, yeah. I mean, I suppose I just know that I don't go into that sort of situation very often, and I don't purport to
Mm.
be someone like Giles who's done it over and over again. And I suppose there is the danger of, while we were in it on that story, you know, was it this photograph? Yeah, this image. So, the translator's like, we have to go now. We've been here half an hour. There's an ISIS cell 2 kilometers over that way. It's time to go. And then you're like, right, okay, but but I think for me, it's always about calculated risks. Um,
Mm. Yeah,
yeah.
well, I think you have to, don't you? Yeah, I've got another question for you. Just come in. How did the Greenpeace commissions come about?
Um, Randomly through someone I used to work with who ended up working at Greenpeace and basically contacted me one day saying, would I be interested in doing a job for them? So um, that's how that came about. But I suppose it sounds random and lucky, but you and someone said to me the other day, it's not random and lucky how you get work because it's a case of you've done a good job previously, that person's then remembered you, and then they've thought about you when they go to their next job. So, yeah, I think it's really important to whoever you're doing, whoever you accept a commission from, make sure you give it your absolute 1000% every single time because you just never know what amazing opportunities it might lead to.
Mm. Yeah, Andre again asks the question: does the experience distract you from the photography? He says I might come home with a headache.
That's a really good question. I mean, um, I think weirdly in Antarctica, the photography distracted from the experience because we were seeing humpback whales sort of left, right, and centre, but never quite from the right angle, never quite close enough on the boat. And me and Nuge, the video guy, were constantly like, effing and blinding that, we hadn't sort of quite got it quite how we wanted it, because the first whale you see, you're like, wow, and then you're like, yeah, but the picture's not very good. So then it's kind of a case of all the other whales, you're just like, oh, the picture's not right, instead of kind of being like, oh my goodness, there's a whale jumping here and a penguin jumping there. And um, so that's quite a funny question, really. That does the experience which way around was it? Does the experience detract from photography or the other way around?
Yeah, it was. Does the experience distract you from the photography?
Yeah, no, it's the other way around. The photography distracts from the experience, but then you sort of get back to the ship and you're like, wow, I've just seen this, that, and the other, or yeah. But it's all part of the same thing for me, like when I do whatever I'm doing, whenever I do an assignment, I like to immerse myself in it completely, whether I'm in Antarctica or Iraq or in Sheffield or doing a quick portrait in Camden for a magazine. I like to sort of kind of really be in the moment, um and for me the experience and the photography are all part of the same thing, because I mean I've been doing this for a long time now, and for me part of how I see the world is it's almost like the camera translates it for me sometimes.
Mm.
I don't know if any of you guys feel that yeah, for me a camera is a bit like Google Translate between me and the world sometimes.
Yeah, I just wondered. I'm just wondering, as you're talking about the difference between someone who does photography as their whole living, as opposed to those of us who do it because we enjoy it, and because not because we've got any pressures to make any income out of it. I know I find myself coming home from events, just like you're saying about the whales. You come back and you've taken some pictures, and you think those aren't very good, but I do remember seeing the whales, and you have to turn it on its head, don't you?
Yeah, I mean I don't think there's any difference between those of us who make our money from this and those of us who do it because we love it, because we're all doing it for the same reason, aren't we?
Mm.
um I think I wasn't sure what you meant then by the.
Well, it's just, I think it's what we're talking about here. You saying about the photography is distracting you from, or from the experience rather than vice versa. And most of us tend to think of it as the experience is really important, and we almost forget to take photographs.
Yeah, I mean, I love an experience and I love taking pictures, and the two together is like pure heaven.
Mm. Yeah, I was lucky last year. I saw a tiger in India that sat still for about half an hour, so I could enjoy both.
And I think that's something to like remind ourselves of, especially if we're working on our own project. So on an assignment, it's different because you're there, you've got a limited amount of time, and you've got to get the pictures. But when we're working on our own projects, it's kind of, the magic does come. You've just got to be patient with it, keep trying, and be open to it. Because I think all my favorite pictures have almost kind of come to me when I'm in the zone. I kind of call it being in the zone. So once you get into that moment where you're inside the experience and you're inside the photography and you're feeling it, then the pictures just pop up, which
Mm.
is what happened with this one, you know.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
she almost has a halo, which I guess is somebody behind her, but it sort of accentuates her, doesn't it?
yeah. I just love that it's focused on the kind of drips of the window,
Yeah.
the dust sort of stuck to the window.
Mhm. The ones that you took through your porthole in Antarctica, I thought were amazing as well. Particularly the one of the mountain. That's the
Yeah,
Iceland.
this is my favorite one. We'd been sailing for like a week or two, and we arrived at the first kind of incredible place, which was Paradise Bay. And in the morning, we just woke up, and that was the view. And for me, that was just amazing. And then this was shot on the last night of our trip before we headed back to Argentina. And this was actually the hottest day that has been recorded in Antarctica. And we visited a kind of research station, and it was literally, yeah, it was the hottest day on record in the Antarctic. And that was the kind of sunset on that day, which is kind of very strange that that was recorded whilst we were there, and also kind of quite, freaky.
Mm. a beautiful image, and as you say, combine it with what you know of the environment, and it's even more powerful. I have a question
Yeah,
here. Where would you recommend starting if you're considering transitioning from documentary photography as a hobby to documentary photography as a profession?
I would start by getting a portfolio together or getting a website together of all your best imagery. And then start approaching people you'd like to work for, start emailing them, start getting in touch on social media, um, start looking at awards and things to work towards. I've always found that's really useful, that if you know that there's a kind of documentary awards coming up, to sort of create work to put in for that, because that's one way to sort of get your name known. But it depends, what stage is this person at?
I don't know. Roland, tell us. I'm not sure that he's typing. You could even unmute yourself, Roland, if you wanted to ask the question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello.
Yep.
Yep, I can hear you.
Hey, yeah, I wouldn't say I'm like, I guess I've always had a somewhat romantic idea of like being a sort of photojournalist, but I feel like a lot of the time I'm just sort of don't really know where to start. Like, but as you say, I think what you've said seems like good advice. Just actually like emailing. Would you suggest like emailing agencies or individual photographers like yourself?
I wouldn't suggest emailing photographers or agencies, because I mean, I think the first thing is like make good work.
Mm,
Like that's number one. Like get a project together that you're really proud of, get it up on your website, get your Instagram on the go. And then I mean, you can get in touch with photographers. I mean, I don't tend to use assistants very much, but that's a really good way to get started. Um, or agencies, I think you could start with agencies, but I think you need to show that you can work first. So start by contacting design agencies or magazines or online publications or whatever it is, wherever it is you'd like to see your pictures. You know, what do you look at and think, oh, I'd love to take pictures for them? And then find out who their picture person is, because every company, every organization, you know, press, there's always someone who kind of deals with that. So it's just a case of finding out who that is. And these days you can do that really easily on social media, you know. So I guess make good work, put it into a place like a website or Instagram where it can be easily viewed, and then put yourself out there. Create a dream list of who you want to work for. Find out at those places who commissions photography. I mean, that's the tricky bit, but you know, it can be done with a bit of research. So yeah, and go for it. But it sounds really glamorous, but it really isn't. You know, I have had people come and work with me who then decided they don't want to be photographers, because they're always saying to me, what's happening next week, Abbie? What's happening? You know, and I'm like, I don't even know what's happening tomorrow, let alone next week. I mean, obviously you do tend to know, you know, I know if I'm going to Antarctica next month, for example, but you know, the life of a photographer is, it's super glamorous when you're on the boat and there's a whale there, and even if you are kind of going, oh my god, um, but the reality of sort of sitting at home thinking, when's my next job coming, and it's not so glamorous. So I think it's kind of being a photographer. It's being able to cope with a certain type of life as well as loving photography. You know.
sure. Yeah, I mean, I already work freelance, so I kind of get that. Yeah, but maybe you could have it as like start by maintaining another side gig to maintain an income. And
Yeah, I mean, there's a great set of podcast series called A Small Voice, and where a guy called Ben Smith interviews lots of photographers, and he always asks them about their pie chart of income,
mm,
because I think these days everyone, you know, there's no such thing as a kind of job for life. You know, you need little different bits coming in from different ways. But I would say if you're already freelancing, just go for it. You know, like every photographer I've ever met, it's kind of how determined are you? Because if you're really determined and you're prepared to sort of, you know, work hard, you'll get there and you
sure.
can make it happen.
Sweet. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. And Andre's just come back and said it's a bit of a trap, of course, because there's a difference between being a professional and doing it because you love it. Because if you do end up having to make all your income out of it, you really have to work bloody hard to do that.
Yeah, but it's it's not easy. But I think if you love photography, you don't have to make all your living out of it, do you? Like I think life is about kind of doing what, doing something that pays the bills, something that you love, and if you can do something that also pays the bills, brilliant. But I think you've got to start somewhere, haven't you?
Yeah, it reminds me a bit of, I've heard, I know of opera singers, for example, who are quite successful, but who've got degrees in engineering, degrees in other
Exactly.
languages, something that they can fall back on if it doesn't work out.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people seem to earn money from other things and then use that to make incredible photography work. So there's lots of ways of doing it these days, more than ever, aren't there?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I think if you can stop sharing your screen, Abbie, I will share mine. Yeah. Right. Okay. And so just final comment here. Thank you, Abbie, it was a fascinating and illuminating talk. I mean, just the discussions of the various projects we got involved with and the variety is incredible. I did thank Sean for co-hosting, but he's not actually managed to make it tonight. Our next talk will be on the 27th of September. It's a week later than it normally is because on the third Monday I shall still be in France. So I hope. So it'll be on the new photo book distinction and what makes it different from other distinction genres. And it's going to be given by Stuart Wall, one of the team who's developed this particular distinction. So Abbie, thank you so much once again. We'll really keep an eye out for your book, and please do let me know about the Kickstarter and I'll do what I can to help. So
Thanks everyone for coming.
So thank you very much, Abbie, and thanks everybody. And we'll see you all next month, I hope. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.